What's up everyone, welcome back to another episode of AWS tutorial. This video is part 2 of the tutorial that I talk about how to build a complete register and login system on AWS. If you haven't seen part 1 of it, make sure you check that out first. I'll include a link down below. And in today's video, I'm going to show you how to build out the front end with React.js and host that on an S3 bucket. So at the end of the tutorial, you're going to be able to build a system that looks like this, where you have the home page that you can access with or without authentication, and then you can register for an account, and then you can log in with credentials. And then for the premium page, you can only access that after you log in. And if you're not logged in and try to access it, it will just direct you back to the login page. So right now, if I just log in with my account, and this is the premium content page, it's able to get my name from the database and then telling me that it's logged in. And if I log out, it just directs me back to the login page. So I did the minimum amount of CSS for this tutorial, but if you want to learn the CSS styling to make the forms look pretty, comment down below. If there's enough interest, I can make a separate video for that. But this tutorial is going to focus on the functionality of the login system. So without further ado, let's get to it. Alright, so before we get to the coding part, let's have a quick refresher on how the backend API looks like. So we basically have 3 endpoints that we're going to use. The first one is the register that we're going to use to register a new account. And then we have the login endpoint that we're going to use to authenticate our users. And then finally, we have the verified endpoint that we're going to use to check the user's token to see if it's valid and not expired. To create a React.js app, you have to have node.js installed in your machine. And if you don't have that yet, you can just go to the website and follow the instructions to download that. And now let's create a React.js app together. So what I'm going to do is I'll open terminal and then navigate to the directory where you want to save your project. And then we're going to use npx to create a React.js app. And if you don't have that installed, you can do npm installed npx. So what I would do is npx create React app. I'll just call it front end. Okay, seems like it's done, and I think there's an error. Permission denied when opening the package log.json. That is fine, we don't need this file. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to use VS Code to open the front end project. Okay, so now I have VS Code open the front end project that we just created, and now let's start the app to make sure that it's working first. So I open terminal. I do npm start. Alright, so it seems like it's working. Now let's go back to VS Code, Control C. And now let's remove some of the files that we don't need for simplicity. So we don't need these 3. We don't need this either. We don't need this. And inside app.js, we're going to remove this. And then remove that as well. And then just say something like hello. And then inside index.js, we're going to remove this. And then remove that. And now let's test it again. Okay, it's still working. Now let's go back to VS Code, Control C. First thing first, we're going to add some libraries to the package.json file. So the first one is Axial that we're going to use to call the API. That's the latest version. And then we're going to use React Routed DOM. And I think that's all we need. You can install them one by one as we go, but I already know what we need, so I'm going to install them all at once. I just do npm install. It will install everything here. Alright, so it's done. And now let's go to the app.js file. And let's define the UI first. We're going to have a browser router. It does the auto import. And then inside, we're gonna have a header tag, have a class name, I'll just call it header. And then I'm gonna have nav link for the home page. And then the next one is register. That should be class name. Register. And then two more. We're gonna have a login page that says login. And then we're gonna have a premium content page. And then we're gonna have a content div. I'll just call it content. Inside we're gonna have a switch. And then inside we're gonna have 4 routes that points to 4 components: home, register, login, and premium content. Let's create those components first. So inside source, I'll do home.js, register.js, login.js, and then premium content. And then inside home, let's do import, then const home, return. Let's just do a div for now. And then we're gonna export default as home. And then do the same thing for the other 3 components. Okay, let's get back to the app.js file and use them. So inside the switch tag, we're gonna have route, it doesn't do the import for us. So let me just do it myself. Import home from home. And then let's do it for others as well. Okay. And then next we have route. Okay, so the skeleton is done. Let's test it out. Alright, beautiful. Let's do some basic CSS to make it more legible. So we define the class name to be header and content. So let's go to the index.css file. So the first one is header. Let's do a margin of 2 em, 0, 2 em, and 2 em. And then add some padding just to the bottom. 1 em should be good. And then let's add the border line to the bottom to be 1 pixel, and then solid line. And then for the anchor tag, let's do some small margins: 0, 1 em, and then 0, 1 em, just for the left and right. And then font size, let's make it bigger. 1.2 em should do it. And then finally text decoration, we're gonna have none. And then for the content, margin 2 em, and then font size, let's do 1.5. Okay, let's see how it looks like now. Alright, perfect. And now it seems like we have the routing working correctly. Now let's go back to VS Code. Alright, so the home page is basically done. We don't need anything else. Now let's work on the register page. Let's build a form for user input. So we're going to do a form, and then the callback function is going to be submit handler, and then inside let's have a h5 header that tells us what this page is, and then we have a name input, type text, and then value we're going to set it to just name. On change we're going to have a function inside that's going to call setName event target.value. We're going to define this later. You may see this is a striking line here, but after we define that, that's going to be gone. And then we're going to close it and then start a new line. And then the next input is going to be email. And the next one is username. And then the last one is password. And then we're going to have a submit button. Type is submit. And then value is register. Alright, now let's define these attributes and functions. So we're going to use something called use state from React. And then inside here on top, we're going to define some constants. So the first one is name, set name, use state, initialize it as an empty string. And then we're going to define this function or as a constant. Alright, now you can see that the striking line is gone. We're going to do event prevent default. And then for now, we're just going to console.log it to see if it's working. Alright, let's test it out. Use state is not defined. Let's see what happened. Use state. Use state, not user state. Okay, it's working now. Register. Alright, we see our form. And let's inspect that. Console. Okay, submit button is working. And now let's go back and make all the fields required. So we're gonna do if username trim let's define a message to show the user what's going on. We are going to set message and say all fields are required, and then we're going to return. And then under the form we're going to use that message. We're going to do if it's defined, and then we're going to have a paragraph. Let's do a class name of message, and then the message to display is the message. Okay, npm start. And now if I just press register, it's going to say all fields are required. Let's make it red. So message css. I'm going to do color to be red, and then the font size we want it to be smaller. That's 2.7. Okay, if I do register, now it looks good. But then if I fill them out, nice. Now let's go back to the register component. And in here, we're going to call the API to register our user. And we're going to use Axio. So I'm going to import that first. And now we can take the register URL from our backend API. Let's go to stages, prod, and then copy this. I'm just going to define it as a constant here, the URL, register URL, but you may want to put that as a environment variable or something. To register. And then inside this function, I'm going to define a request config that contains the header or headers, because we need to give it the API key, otherwise it's not going to allow us to call the API. So I do x API key, and then go back to the AWS console, scroll down, API key, minus the client, and that is our API key. And same thing for this, you may want to store that in your environment variable. I'll just put it here for simplicity's sake. And then we're going to define the request body. Username. Email. Name. And then password. And then we're going to use the Axios client to do a post request. Register URL. Request body. And then request config. If it's successful, we are going to set the message to be registration successful. But then if it's an error, what we're going to do is, if the error, the status code is 401, that means it's a user error. We're going to set the message to be whatever the error returns. If it's something else, that means the server has an error in the backend. We're just going to say, sorry, the backend server is down. Please try again later. Okay, that is it. Let's test it out. Okay, register. Let's say name is test name, email test at email.com, and then username, let's say test user, password ABC, hit register. Alright, registration successful. Oh, I have a typo here, but whatever. And now let's go back to the dynamodb to make sure that the user is actually there. Open that into a new tab. Table. Item. Alright, so test user is there. And then the name is test name. Password. Okay, seems like it's working. And now let's do this one more time. And it's going to tell us that the user already exists. It's a 401. User already exists. Please choose a different username. Okay, cool. This is working. Let's move on to the login page. Okay, so the same thing, we're going to have a form. And then the first one is username. And then the next one is password. Type is password as well. And then do the same thing here. And then lastly, we're gonna have a submit button. Value that is gonna say login. And now we're gonna define these things. So the first one is username, use state, except it doesn't import that automatically. Next one is password. And then let's also have a message. Because if the password is wrong, we want to tell the user, let's call it error message this time. Just set it to null. Let's also change the message for that to be null in the register. And then after the form, we're gonna do message and a paragraph. The class name, we'll also use the same class for simplicity. And then the error message. Okay, so it's done. And now let's define this function. That is also a constant submit handler equal to event. Do the same thing here, prevent default. We're also going to check if the username is empty or the password is empty, and then we're going to tell the user. We're going to set the error message to be and then return. And then if the user enters them, let's just log it out for now. Alright, let's test it and see if it's working. Message is not defined, 26. Error message, how about that? Okay. Alright, both username and password are required. Same thing. Alright, let's reset that if it's there. We can do something like set error message back to null. Let's do this, and then we enter something. Alright, so it's working. And now let's configure that to call the API. Alright, let's have this in the register.js as well before we call the API. Set message to be null. Okay, the same thing, we're gonna define the API key. I'm just gonna copy that, paste it here, and then we're gonna get the endpoint URL for the login. So I go back here, copy this, I'll just change that to login. That should do it. And then we're going to define the request body. Username is the username, and then password is password, simple. And then we're going to use the Axio client to log in or to call the URL. And then response. And now we're going to set the user sessions, but let's define the method in a separate file. So I go back to source and then new folder. I will just call it service. And then inside here, we are going to do auth service.js. We're going to do module exports. So in here, I'm just going to define all the authentication related functions that we're going to use throughout the tutorial so that we don't have to come back here again. So the first one is get user, which is a function that is to check if we currently have a user stored in our session storage. And if we do, we can just get it there. User. And then let's say if we don't have a user, we're going to return null. One thing I found that is weird is sometimes if it's undefined, it's going to return a string undefined. I don't know if it's just my browser or is consistent throughout. So I'm going to check if the string is equal to undefined as well. If not, that means we can just return the JSON object of user. Okay, and then the second function we're gonna define is get token, and we're just gonna do this and then set user session, which is a function as well. And simply we're just gonna set the user to be the stringify version of the user. We're gonna pass that in as a parameter. And the same thing for the token. Token is just a string. And then finally we're gonna have a reset user session that is also a function. We're gonna remove item user and the token. Okay, now let's go back to the login component and we're gonna import the set user session from the file we just defined. We need to import the Axio as well. Okay, so in here we can just say set user session, and then we're going to get the user item and the token from the response body. So response.data.user, and then response.data.token. And then we're going to direct the user to the premium content page. So we're going to use the props here. And then we're going to do props.history.push. That is the URL endpoint. But then if we have an error, and if the status is 401, or if it's 403, that means if it's the username or the password is incorrect, we're going to show the user the message. We're going to show whatever the response says. And then if it's something else, that means the server is down. So we're going to say that should be everything. Now let's test it out. Okay, register, login. I forget what the username is, so let's go back here. Test user ABC. Nice. So it's working. And now let's enter the wrong password. Test user ABCD. It's gonna say password is incorrect, or if we do this, it's gonna say username does not exist. All right, cool. And now let's build out the premium content page. Premium content. First thing we're going to add is we're going to add a logout button for the user to use after the login. Okay, so that is done. And let's change the text a little bit. We say hello someone. We're going to get the name from the database. And in order to get the name, we need to get a user first. We're going to see if the user exists in our system currently from the session token. So we're going to use const user get user, and then we're going to get a username from the user object, we have to check if it's not undefined and not null, and then we're gonna get it, or we're just gonna set it to be an empty string. And then now we're gonna define the logout handler function. We set user session, and then we are going to direct the user to the login page if they log out, because we don't want to show them the premium content page if they're not logged in. Okay, so it's done. Let's test it out. Perhaps it's not defined. Line 10. Of course. Alright, homepage, premium content. Alright, let's change that to be a new line. Okay, so since we're not logged in, so it doesn't have any username to display. So let's log in. Pass user ABC. Alright, nice. Seems like it's working. But the last thing that we have to do is that we want to prevent the user from accessing this page when they're not logged in. So log out. But now I can still access it without any problem. So let's fix that. So we're gonna create a new folder called routes. And inside we're gonna have a public route. And then we are going to have a private route. And obviously this is the route that we only want the user to access if they're not logged into the system, and that is going to be used for the routes when the user are logged in. So let's define this first. So first we're going to import so I'm going to do const public route, do component rest, and then I'm going to return a route, and then rest render a callback function that says props return. We're gonna do we're gonna check if the token does not exist. We're gonna allow that to access whatever the public component is. Otherwise, if the token exists, we're gonna redirect the user to a path name equal to the premium content. Okay, and then finally we're going to export default public route. And now let's do the same thing for the private route, except the logic is the opposite. We're going to do the opposite here, and then we're going to direct that to the login page. I think I missed a slash in here. Okay, so it's done. Let's use them. Okay, so in our app.js, let's import them first. Do that. And then the premium content page is gonna be a private route. And the register and login page is gonna be public route, because after the user is logged in, we don't want them to log in again or create a new user. And the home page is a normal one that you can access with or without authentication. Alright, now let's test it. Okay, so now it's not logged in. I'm able to access register, login, but not the premium content page. It just directs me to the login page, even if I type in premium content. It's not gonna let me get there. And now let us log in. Test user. Okay, now it's the premium content. I'm able to access it, and it's able to get my name from the database. And if I hit login, it's not gonna let me get there. If I hit login, it's going to direct me to the premium content page. Same thing for the register. Okay, seems like it's working. Okay, so one last thing that we have to do is that we need to check if the token is expired, because we don't want the user to stay logged in forever. We want it to be logged out after the expiration time is up. And we're going to use the verify endpoint to do that. So let's get back to VS Code. And we're going to do URL. We're going to copy that from, let's say, the register one. And change that to verify. And then we're going to use the special hook called use effect. And we're going to import some auth functions. We're going to import React as well. So first, we're going to check if the token exists. And if the token is undefined, we're just going to return. Otherwise, we're going to call the API to verify to see if the token is valid. So we're going to do a request config. And then request body user get user token, and then we're going to import Axio. And then Axio is a post. Then I'm going to set the user token a session. And then if we have an error, we're just going to do reset user session. Remember here in the closing tag, have an empty bracket. Seems like this may take maybe a split second. Let's define a loading page. And then after this, we're gonna do, so if it's authenticating and we have a token that's being checked or being validated, if that happens, we're gonna return a div authenticating ... You're probably not gonna see this often because the authentication or the validation call is pretty quick. So it should come back pretty fast. And here, if the token is validated, we are going to set authenticating to be false. And if there's an error, we're also going to set it to be false because the authentication is complete. And that is it. Let's test it out. Okay, seems like it's working. All right, so let me log in. Test user ABC. And now if I refresh, you could actually see that the authenticating page was popping up for like 0.1 seconds. And now let me go back to the backend system and change the token timeout to be 30 seconds and see how the token expiration works here in the front end. So I go to AWS, type in Lambda, open that into a new tab. This is the API. So under auth, we have a expires in attribute. Currently it's set to 1 hour. I don't think it works for seconds, but if you don't specify a unit, the default unit is milliseconds. I'm going to do 30,000, so that means 30 seconds. So hit deploy, and then go back to our home page. Hit log out for now, and then I'm going to log in again. So I'm going to pause the video for 30 seconds and then come back. Alright, so it's been 30 seconds. If I refresh the page right now, it's going to log me out and direct me back to the login page. And yep, seems like it's working. Alright, so now is the last part of the tutorial. we're going to create an S3 bucket and then host our website there and see everything working. So I go back to the AWS console, type in S3, open in a new tab, create bucket, give it a name. I just call it Ginmeister register login client. We're going to uncheck this because we want it to have public access, and then acknowledge. You can also do this later after the bucket is created. I'll just do it here so I don't have to do it later. And then enable versioning, enable server-side encryption, create bucket. And then we're going to get into the bucket, do properties, and then scroll all the way to the bottom. Under static website hosting, we're going to do enable. Here we're going to do index.html. This one is also index.html. Save changes. And then under permissions, inside bucket policy, we're going to hit edit, and then we are going to copy over a policy. So go to ginmeister.com, which is my personal website that I post things about AWS and algorithms. So you can check it out if you're interested. So just do individual services, S3, and then scroll down. We're going to copy this. And then go back to S3, paste it here. And then we're going to change the bucket name to be your bucket name. And then hit save, and then go to objects. And now let's build our React.js app first and then upload the files. So go back to VS Code, Control C, and then do npm run builds. So that builds the project for website hosting. What it does is that it creates a build folder and then put all the necessary files in there. Alright, so it's done. That's how it looks like. So we're gonna upload everything inside this build folder to S3. So hit upload, add files, and then navigate to that folder. And then select everything. It's not gonna let you select a static folder, but we're gonna do it later. So hit open, and then now, so we did add files before, now we do add folder to add the static folder. Hit upload, hit yes, and then upload. Alright, so it's done. Let's close it. And then properties. Scroll all the way down. This is our website URL, so click on that. Hey, this is our page where we have the home page, register, and then login, and then premium content. Of course, it's not going to let us get there. And now let's create a new account and test the whole flow. I do Felix test at email.com. Username, let's do Felix ABC. Right, let's do capitalize just to tell it apart. Hit register. Registration successful. Still with the typo. And then we're going to do login. Felix ABC. Hit enter. And it's able to get my name capitalized, and then it's logged in. Now if we do log out, it just directs us back to the login page. And now let's log in again and then wait 30 seconds for that to expire. No. Okay, I'm gonna pause the video and then come back in 30 seconds. Alright, so it's been 30 seconds. So if I refresh the page right now, it's gonna log me out and direct me back to the login page. And it's working. Alright, so this is it everyone. I hope you have learned something. And if you like this video, I hope you can give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video.